is one of the most fun things I have done for some time. My style of drawing is more of kind of having things in my head that have to come out rather than always do, I could do the observational, realistic stuff, but what I really love doing is just fooling around with materials and see what happens and what comes out. And the other thing that I really enjoy doing is working on black paper. It's something very magical about it. And one of the things to liken working on black, oh, I did notice that somebody in the chat room already said, could I work with white paper? Because yes, by all means. I actually am going to be working on some white paper in addition to the black paper. So the main thing is get a feel for the material. You can see what I'm doing, and then you can kind of project what you might do on the black paper. But if you think about blackness and drawing on black, it's kind of like the exact opposite of working on a white piece of paper, where you start with a white piece of paper, that's your highlight. And with a black paper, those are your shadows. So you kind of go from opposite ends of the spectrum. So what happens is that you add pigment. Let's say you're using well, colored pencil or anything on white paper, and you build to the shadows. Whereas with the black paper, you kind of let things emerge from the darkness. And that's what I like about it, because I think that yeah, there's a certain fascination and a little bit of scariness with things that are in the dark. And so we're going to be responsible for making the things emerge from the blackness and come out. But most of what I draw are very friendly characters that you would be more than happy to get to know. So you don't have to fear them. But anyhow, so we'll get started. And the first thing I'm going to do is kind of work with the black pencils, all right, or the pencils, the black edition pencils. And in these pencils, they come in 100 colors, but they are, broken down into different size sets. And then I'm going to move into also be working with the black edition markers. And these come in sets of 20. And I'm going to show you some just basic techniques or things, and then I'm going to show you how to apply those in a more substantial utilitarian way. So as far as the paper is concerned, when you get black paper or if you're using white paper, you want a good quality paper. You don't have to break the bank because paper can be very expensive, but you'll be doing yourself a favor if you get the best paper you think is reasonable within your budget. You don't want to be using like construction paper. I mean, you can, there's absolute reason why you can't use that, but you'll get better results if you have a heavier paper, because as you'll see, as I start working on these, that I'm going to do a lot of layering. I'm going to do a lot of stuff that is putting the paper through its paces. And if it's too thin or if it's inadequate to the task, you just won't get as good of results. And so why put all your effort into doing something and use really, kind of nice quality drawing materials, and then you're using, a flimsy piece of paper or inadequate paper to base all your effort. So it doesn't make sense to do that. You want to make sure you have a good foundation, much the same as when you're building a house. You want the house to be a good foundation. Okay, so I'm going to just take a couple of these colors, and the way that this works is that you want to kind of think about how to balance the brightest, most intense colors and then let it kind of taper into shadow. Okay, so let's just start. And I always go over this. When I draw with an art pencil, I have a tendency to hold it kind of closer to the end, because then that way I have a little more control with how many pressure and how much pigment I'm putting down. So if I start, and I can put a very light little bit of pigment down on my paper, and I'm also using what's called a cold press. Now, when they make paper, they put a finish on the paper, and if you have a really, really smooth surface, that is a hot press. They have an extra step where they put it through a hot platen, and that kind of, it's almost like ironing your clothes. It just makes it absolutely smooth. And then cold press is more of the natural texture of the paper through the process of making the paper. And so I like using a paper that has a texture, because as I start covering it with heavier deposits of pigment, you can see where there's like a texture that develops. And especially with the black, if I want something to kind of merge out of the background, I get shadows by just putting a real light little deposit of pigment down on the paper, and the black reads through. And so you can see there's a tone there, but it's dark because the black paper is still coming through. And by the opposite, if I'm putting something down on the white paper and I hardly put any pigment down, then it's still going to be really white. And it isn't until I really load it up with pigment that it looks like it's a bright color. So you can see how you can go from a very, very light application of the pigment, but on black paper, that transfers into more of a shadow area. So it goes from black into a darker version of the paper. And then when I come in through here, if I really put a lot of pressure on, I start filling in. Like paper has a texture to it. And the best thing to do in the beginning is to just put light pressure, so you're only putting pigment on the top surface. So if you have to erase it or if you have to make a change, then it's pretty easy to do that. But if I put a lot of pressure on the pencil, then it starts forcing the pigment down below the surface, the top surface. So instead of layering pigment on top of the texture of the paper, I'm not only doing that, but I'm also filling in the valleys. So you can see where it's really like, if you do the same thing on a white piece of paper, you go from, kind of a light deposit, let's say graphite, into something that is really dark. Well, this is the same thing, only you're doing on the black paper, but you get the same kind of feeling where here is your value scale from black to the brightest color that you can get with one pencil. So let's try it on a couple of things, and maybe you could try it yourself and follow along with me. Just see if you kind of get the technique where you're just hardly putting any pigment down, and then start adding a little bit of pressure so you get more and more pigment. And let's see what happens then, again, with this. When I get really heavy with it, then, and again, by holding the pencil this way, I have a lot more control than if I hold the pencil as if I'm going to write somebody a letter. And let's get one more color. Let's get a nice kind of, there's a really beautiful blue. All the colors are pretty nice. So I'll put a light color here again. And so I think you'll be able to get the idea of what the theory is here in terms of going from very light applications of color to very heavy. And when you look at this, I mean, it's just, these colors are going to pop. They really pop off the surface, because when you finally get to this point, there's such a great contrast between the real rich black and this really bright color that you'll be able to kind of manipulate that a little bit. All right, so as long as I've got this blue pencil in my hand, and you'll want to use a handheld pencil sharpener. If you use a office pencil sharpener, or if you use electric one, unless it's made very specifically for art pencils, you may have a little bit of problem with it, because a regular pencil sharpener puts on a very sharp point. Now you want a nice point, but because these are soft, because the fact that they're soft, that's why you get this real nice opacity. But if you have too sharp of a point, and it's too long of a point that you get in a regular pencil sharpener, then as soon as you start to draw, you're going to have the lead just kind of ping off and go across the room. So it's much better to use a handheld sharpener. And just do it gently. You don't force it, but go it around. It takes a little bit of getting used to. These are triangular shapes, so ergonomically they're great to work with. But sometimes in the round hole, you just have to be a little gentle with it and give it plenty of leeway to be able to sharpen. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just draw kind of a sphere here to show you now how to kind of take this kind of stuff and use it to get a variety of tones on a piece of black paper. So I'm going to think about my light like kind of coming in from this direction. All right, so I'm going to start again very lightly. And if I'm thinking about the top surface getting most of the light, I'm going to kind of work on that a little bit more to start building up a brightness at the top. And then as I go down the sphere, then I'm going to let it fade out to like nothing. And so already, if you might be able to see how it's starting to emerge. If I had kind of covered that whole circle with the same amount of pigment, then it would just be a geometric flat circle, but I'm trying to give it some kind of volume. And usually volume can be created by replicating reflected light. So if something has dimension, it's more apt to have shadows and highlights and midtones. And if you have a flat geometric shape, it has a tendency just to be one value and one color. All right, so I'm going to kind of come in and I'm going to start now forming the sphere. Again, I'm kind of concentrating most of the pigment kind of on the top. All right, so now I'm going to really go into it. And, don't hesitate to turn your paper if that's what it requires. And I do this kind of gradually. So I have some control over the transition of the values. Now I'm going to put just a tiny bit of tone down there at the bottom. All right, so I hope that, it's starting to show up on the screen there. That's like, oh yeah, that's starting to look like a sphere. And now I'm going to come up and I'm going to start to get heavier applications at the top. I'll let it fade to the bottom. And now in this area here is kind of, I'm thinking about that being primarily where the highlights are. I'll go over it some more. And so what I'm doing now is putting enough pigment that it's starting to block out all of the black, not only on the top grain, but in the little valleys as well. And now I can kind of work this down just a little bit. I don't want to lose. The tendency will be to be put too much down. I mean, you want it just to be coming through. And if you can imagine looking up at the moon, a real clear night, that even though it may not be a full moon, you still kind of get the implication of it being a sphere. Okay. Now, the other thing that often happens when you have light on a sphere, it'll hit whatever surface it's sitting on, and it'll have a tendency then to reflect just a little bit underneath the sphere. So I'm going to put just a little bit of reflective highlight at the bottom, and that will kind of complete your sense of that. Okay, so now we got the sphere. What I'm going to do is kind of imagine, all right, if the light is kind of coming from this direction, then the shadow is going to be over here, but everything's black. So what I might do, let's see, how about an orange, like kind of an orangish tablecloth type thing. All right, so what I'm going to do is just very lightly sketch in where that shadow might be. And then I can start putting it like, if you had an orange tablecloth, or if I wanted to really be fancy about it, then I could put it like on a check tablecloth or something like that. But In this case, we're just going to kind of put it so like all of a sudden I have drawn the shadow for that sphere. Okay, I got a little over where I want to be, so I'll take my eraser and just, since I didn't use a lot of pressure, I haven't disturbed the texture of the paper at all. So I can use my eraser. This is a vinyl eraser, and I can really sharpen up and get rid of the value that I didn't want. All right, and so now I put a little bit up there as well. So we got the complete surface. And then maybe as I come up, I'm going to let it fade into the background again. So it's almost as if we've got this kind of turquoise-ish sphere sitting on a table, but it's in a spotlight. And then it disappears back into the darkness. So in this way, it kind of emerges. And if I really want to play that up, then I can put this side as even being lighter. And the brightness of the ground that my sphere is sitting on is going to be a nice contrast and make that black shadow look even darker. And I can put just a little bit more in through here. And then let it fade into the background as well as this direction too. So it really didn't take very much to get that to pop and look somewhat, modeled on the black paper. I mean, you just have to be kind of careful the way you're working. And if you really want to kind of, as I say, gild the lily, I can take they have a nice white pencil as well. And so if I really want to kind of play up the sense of a highlight, I can then add a little bit of white on the top, and that will blend with the color underneath it, and then that'll make that even brighter. And maybe just a little bit more. And if you go too far, you could pick up some of that by using an eraser. Kneaded erasers are good because they're kind of sticky. And if I want to pick a little bit up instead of really erasing it, I can just kind of daub it a little bit, and that'll start picking up that white if I've gone a little too heavy in some areas. So there are a lot of things that you can do to kind of correct as you're working. Okay, so that's the basic way of working it. And now what I'd like to do is kind of play around with texture. All right, so in this case, I am going to make something just kind of using the texture. In this case, I'm going to start with a triad of colors. So I've got kind of this nice darker pink, and I've got kind of a lighter pink, and then I'll have the white. So I'm going to take my darker color first. Again, I like to kind of just make sure I am working with a sharp pencil. And what I'm going to do is kind of sketch a little, very lightly. I can make some little sketch lines here that eventually will be covered up. Go. And what I'm going to do is just play with the marking of it. So I'm going to kind of, wait a minute, I'll get that. Make sure it points where I want it. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start making these strokes. And I'm, instead of keeping my hand down, I'm just letting them go where they want. And I'm not using a tremendous amount of pressure, but I am making the marks. And then As I get into an area that I'm thinking might be darker, I'm going to use less pressure. So I'm still getting the texture, I'm still getting those marks, but they're not quite as bright, and I'm allowing more of the black to show through. Okay, so I'm going to skip. I'm going to do some down here. I'm going to do some down here. And I'm going to do some here. So with each mark, I'm kind of building a thicket. And there are some little black shapes that show through. Some of them, I know I'm not going to really put any heavy marks quite yet. I'll get to that in a bit. Just want to kind of start off light, gives me a little more options here. Okay, so now I'm going to come through and I'm going to get kind of a mid-tone yellow, and I'm going to fill in with some more of these strokes. And they're just kind of random, other than, well, the only thing that makes them not random is how much pressure I'm using and how long each of those strokes are. I'm not going all the way, but they're all about the same, but a little helter-skelter for right now, but you'll see soon enough what I'm contriving to do. And these are so soft that it really does not take very much to get them to mark. And you could be, trying out your own pattern or your own idea of the texture that you want to kind of play with. And then finally, I'll kind of do this.
We do have a question.
Yes.
With the metallic colored pencils from Faber-Castell, do they work similarly, or are they less intense?
They will work. I mean, anything that's metallic has a tendency to be somewhat opaque. But I think the way that these have been formulated, they are going to give you a little more success, I think, in terms of the opacity. But they're not metallic, so you got that to think about. And most metallic, are like copper, gold, something like that. What's nice about these pencils, in their opacity, it's a full range, like, red, yellow, orange, green, blue, and all that. So that you'll get, kind of a opportunity to do more than just the metallic. Okay, so here we go. We got that. And now what I'm going to do is start going back in, and I'm going to put in a lighter pink on top. And essentially what I'm doing is making this kind of hairy caterpillar type creature with the idea of us working with creatures of the night. Okay, so now you can see, and I'm going to use a little more pressure because I want these to be a little more opaque. And I'm again thinking about, all right, what's my light source? Well, maybe the light is coming more from this side. So everything that's going to be on this side, I'm going to have much more of the bright. And then as I come over to this side, that's going to be more in shadow. I'm going to put a few of these strokes in here, but they're not going to look nearly as dark. And so then when I develop on the right here, you can see that that is kind of my light source is from this side. And then as it curves around, that's going to be a little bit more like in shadow. And up here, then I'll just do the top. And as it comes around, again, nothing. Now down here, there'll be a little bit of light that would shine through there, but that's just a little bit on that part. And then as it comes across, I'm putting very subdued marks here to keep that dark in shadow. And then when I come to the top, as it twists around, and what I like about this is like, I'm usually kind of more of this type of thing, and to actually get a texture is has been fun for me to kind of play with, because I usually don't think of texture as being part of what I normally do. But this just has such a nice effect that I can't I can't resist. Okay, so now we're really getting our little wormy character there. Now I want to lighten that up so I have a brighter yellow, and the same thing's going to happen, that on top of those marks that I made with the deeper, more like a chrome yellow, I've got full strength chrome here, I've got lighter chrome there, yellow, and then I'll put a couple little highlights there. But most of these colors that are very vibrant, very bright compared to the others, are going to be more in the highlight. And I'm going to come up here and think, okay, well, once again, I'll have a little bit underneath. I'll let those stay dark. And then as this emerges around, then it's going to be a little bit lighter here. And it's going to be definitely lighter kind of at the end. So I've almost got it, I think. We'll work on a little caterpillar face in a minute. But when you look at it, I mean, here's this kind of fuzzy, somewhat ominous creature on our black paper that is scurrying around. You could imagine, like, those silverfish and little insects and things that are found if you pick up a piece of wet newspaper off your basement floor or something.
I'm gonna give you a friendly halfway point.
Okay. All right. Try to make sure we get everything done in plenty of time. Okay, so I'm going to add some white highlights. Okay, and then let's okay, now I'm going to just do as much of as there's a tendency to make these really solid white eyeballs. I'm going to make them a little bit light so the black comes through. I'll sharpen my pencil again. And then towards the light, the eyeball is going to be a lot brighter. And over here, the same thing. And then I thought maybe we'll give it a little mouth. Let it be a little bit brighter on the top part of the lip, off to the side. And then let it get a little darker as it comes around. So heavier concentration towards the light, let it fade out to the gray. And then let's give it a green tone. That seems appropriate. So make it really bright and then let it kind of fade out a little bit. And then I might take a little bit of this blue and just kind of put it around the eye a little bit to kind of make it stand out. Okay, so that's one of our creatures that just fun to make because of the texture and playing around, and it also helps to think about where is the highlight. Okay, the next thing I want to do is start working with combinations of things that you can do together with the black markers. Now, edition markers. Now, these markers, if I go on the black paper, they just really don't show up. The paper absorbs them. These are not opaque, so it actually makes the paper a little bit darker. But what I can do is if I come up with, let's say, just another one of these gradated marks here. We go from like, I can take these markers and then I can layer them. And so I can get kind of the same effect where I go from light to dark, depending on the original base that I put on there. So, I could use these maybe, I can go over the blue. And you could also use your finger. I could kind of rub the finger a little bit. And so that kind of gives it a little shadow. And it instead of like with a black, it just has a little red on it. So it has kind of a purplish shadow. And so we could do the same thing. Let's say up here with the yellow, I can take the blue. Mark over it with the marker and then take my finger, or you could take a cloth or something. And I mean, that's a lot of fun, at least for me. It's terrific fun to do stuff like that. So, you could do something like you give extra little textures with the markers. And what's nice about this is it's a combination of whatever color marker you're using, plus the ground color. So it can read very effectively as a shadow rather than having a shadow that just suddenly kind of pops off and it's not the same.
We do have a question.
Yes.
If the pencil bothers the pen nib, is there any difference in the texture of the pen nib now that it touched the pencil texture?
No, no, no. I mean, they're pretty substantial, and just kind of putting it on top of the pencil is not going to do anything to the nib. And none of this is going to transfer onto it. It's like, if I had maybe another marker and I put this on top of it, the chemistry of this with the similar thing might kind of melt and blend together. But this is going to stay pretty much stable. And I'm just putting a thin coat of the marker color on top of it. And to even it out, when I rub it with my finger, then it creates a real nice shade and a shift in color depending on, if I use a yellow on top of it, it could get brighter. Let's try that. Let's take the yellow. And if I come up and through here, instead of it being that kind of, this is more like a lemon yellow on top of that. So and then I could even blend that off a bit. Okay, so I've got a couple of, like, got a lighter yellow tone, and I've got this yellow that's over here. I can go back on top of what I just did. So you can do a lot of layering, but this way, though, I mean, in addition to the colors you could get with the pencils, you can also alter them using the markers. Now, what I have planned over here, kind of similar to what we did. Aside now, I go under, I'll go over. I've kind of sketched in very lightly two worms. Okay, so we're going to make it green, give it a green head, and I'm going to think about where the light source is coming from. And again, I want it to emerge. So I'm not going to make it too much darker than that, except for up here at the top where I want my brightest colors to be. Because the more that it's kind of looks like it's coming out of dark, the more mysterious it is. And I always kind of think about it, if you think about Hamlet's soliloquy, if you see it staged, they usually turn all the lights off and put a spotlight on him for the drama of it. Everything else disappears, and then Hamlet emerges out of the darkness. So that's kind of what the theory is here with these. And then as this snake comes out over here, we're going to pick it up. It's going over here and culminates down here. So I got a snake that's kind of coming through. And then let's contrast that with kind of a coral color. And to match the colors, I've got to just come up here on the white paper, and then you can kind of see how it works on white paper. So I can get the reds to kind of look the same, but in order to get that red dark, then I might have to select a darker color of red, or even like a brown or something, or a subdued color. And so I'll start to work on that. Or I could also select a, let's try this one. I can use one of my markers. And then I can take my pencil with a darker color, go on top of it. I'll even use my finger to kind of get that to smear a little bit. And then we'll go to the next section, which is, yes, the green. The green will be coming like this. I got to remember who's on top and which is on the bottom. Let me get the greens in here to we may only have time to do one of the snakes, one of the worms, whatever these are.
You have about 20 minutes.
Okay, that's why I want to kind of pick it up. All right, so anyhow, let's get into trying to make this at least one of the worms finished. I'm going to take this approach, I think. And you can blend these. So I put the red down, and now I can put the brown on top of the red. And then I can take the red marker again, and then I can start blending that. So it's more of a gradual blend that is going to be similar to what is happening on the black paper. Let's do one more little section here, because I have a couple other things I really want to try to get accomplished here. More fun than an hour accommodates. Okay, so again, I lost track what I'm doing. Okay, so we'll use this one. I put my marker down. I have no idea what I did with it, so I'll get that to blend. And then let's get a green going. Here we go. Darker green. I'm going to just put a little bit of this at the bottom because I know it's pretty strong. And then I've got another worm that was coming across here, so I want to kind of accommodate for that. And of course, I'll take my lighter color and blend those a little bit. So, all right. So even though I don't think we're going to have the, because I got a couple of other things I want to show you. But anyhow, you can kind of see the way that I'm getting it to transition from the black paper onto the white paper and take advantage of both of them, because I think this kind of has a nice striking look to it. Okay, eyeballs again. If I want to put some eyeballs on my friendly worm shape. And then, okay, so in addition to these pencils, an update on what is coming up, there are also going to be paint markers in the black edition. Okay, so there's shape pens, and they've got 2 points. They have a 3mm point, and then these, like every other thing, you shake them, and then you can pump them. And then what I like to do is just draw with them. And this is a metallic. These, I believe, right now they have 18 colors. They have metallics, they have neon, and then they just have some bright kind of primary colors. And so that, I like the boldness of this and the fact that it's up against the black and it just pops. It's almost like neon. And now this is the other point. And so if I want to, I can, maybe use this for a little cross hatching to give it a little bit of a contrast. And then once I do that, I could come back and say, okay, this is kind of a similar color to that. Sharpen this. Actually, I'm going to take, let's do something that's more of a red. So instead of going right up against the edge, I'm going to put a very light layering. So there's just a little bit of a black line around that. And so I'm creating atmosphere. If you think about a neon sign in the dark, it glows. And so one of the ways I can kind of try to make this look like it's glowing would to put like a little aura around it and let it fade into the darkness. And then as it comes in a little closer, let's make it a little more intense. Again, that idea that you're creating an atmosphere, you're creating a feeling. And if this thing were kind of like a neon type thing, then it'd have the glow closer to the body and then start to fade out. So there's that. Now, the other thing is like you just draw with them as well. Let's see, let's get the yellow. I hope what I am not only am I showing some handy techniques and stuff, but I mean I'm having terrific fun because I'm just making my own little world here, and it's these really bright colors. all those little creatures and characters that exist in my head that are screaming to come out. This is a really good way to get them out. Okay, where's my, there, we'll make this into a bluebird. I was going to make it red, but I can't find it. So I want to keep this a little bit in shadow up and through here and back through here, but right up front. And then as it, just like this sphere, I want it to kind of fade out a little bit. And then in the front, let it fade out a little bit. And then the front part of the wings can be a little brighter because it sticks off from the body a little bit more. So these can be a lot more intense, but it's just a matter of little pressure, lots of pressure. Depends on, you know, like how is the light hitting it and where are the deep shadows? There's another wing over here that would be very bright and up against the body, it'd be a very dark shadow. There's a tail, and maybe these parts would be bright, and that'll. So you fashion the objects, or you could do, I mean, you could do flowers, you could do landscapes. I have a tendency to like kind of just creating these goofy creatures and then start putting the background around it. So let's say on this yellow for his beak, make that kind of really dark and then keep part of it not so dark, bright, bright, not so bright, 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 not so bright. So I can take this orange, yep. If I want, I can kind of tint that a little bit. So I put the Black Edition pencils down first. And then for the part that might be a little bit more in shadow, then I can alter it by going over it with the brush. You might have to do that a couple times. And then let's give him, oh, my pencils. I give him like a little brown top hat because he looks like he should be wearing one. Now let it get kind of dark as it comes around, give it a little bit of a form.
Since I did not give you your 15-minute warning, this is your 10.
Okay. Oh, well, we're doing fine. We're doing fine. I'm glad to, let's give it like a nice orange band across from there. And again, if I want to give it a shadow, you know, I could decide what ground plane color it is. And the shadow parts just don't get filled in. Okay, so then over here, I got kind of a stork goose type character I'll put in. Okay, let's give this one an orange bill. Okay, this guy's going to get a fez. and red eyes. Next a little bit. I could also take a little bit of blue if I want to make that white a little bit more in shadow in some places, but now we'll just give him some orange feet. I'm running away there. So, okay, we got that. So if we're looking overall, I mean, I think this is another thing I like doing is just starting to work on stuff, and it's a little bit here, a little bit here, then you start tying it all together. Maybe if we have a little bit of time left here, we can very quickly, I could keep track of all my fabulous materials. Oh, we already got green. So let's make that a yellow one. I'd like to get a little more of this other worm done so you could kind of see the way that they overtwine on the white paper and then kind of blend into picking up. I just thought it was kind of a cool thing that you would have all this black and then you could have some kind of thing that is in the back, but then all of a sudden really pops out with this white shape. Okay, so we'll primarily make him this one yellow. You could actually take one of our paint markers with a little point. A really nice little bright pound while we're thinking about it. Okay, and then I'm going to use blue. And then we'll come to the yellow. Blue and then I can pick up to get this blue. I can make it into a lighter blue. Using a pencil, and then I'll hope my head isn't blocking out what I'm doing. I get so involved with what I'm doing, I get very excited about it. So sometimes I'm a little oblivious to what's going on. So this yellow will be a little bit brighter. So this way you can kind of start seeing the way that they're going to intertwine. And then at the end, down here, they're kind of twisting up and going around a bit. So, okay, I'm losing. Sorry, I just start working on things and then I make such a mess that.
No, everybody's enjoying it. As we have come to our final minutes, if you have any questions, go ahead and pop
Yeah,
them in the
that's the
chat.
time to ask. I can still be frantically trying to get my snakes done and answer questions at the same time. But it really, I mean, I really hope the biggest thing you get from this session is that you can have so much fun being in your own little creative world. Yeah, you get to make it any way you want. It doesn't have to have anything to do with reality, which is kind of a welcome thing sometimes, an escape from the real world, and you get to go inside of your head. I think I'm gonna make that a little more, and come back in through here, and I think that yellow is starting with the black background, it'll turn yellows a little bit greenish. So if I want to pick that up so that a little more consistent with the yellow.
Patty asked the question
Yes.
of, since you're sharpening into a cup, do you have any plans for the shavings?
Well, I could probably use these when I go out and barbecue. If I want some kindling, I could do that. Yeah, these are just like little black shavings, and I don't know, maybe we could put some little. This is a particularly nice one that looks, it could be like a little worm collar, like a clown collar or something. I mean, yeah, you could do anything you want with it. But I have no immediate purposes in mind. And then the last thing, another thing that I find is kind of fun to do is just I can build up little textures. I can, kind of do these thick to thin. Um, Once that dries, then I can go back dark and dark and dark to give it a little more substance, a little more body to it. But there's just so many cool things that you can do with all these. I think this is one of the things that I love, the really bright red here. These are little measly things that are surrounding our little creature here. So it's just, pretty much up to you to kind of decide. You want something that is totally composed, and you could do that. But as I say, I really enjoy just experimenting and seeing all the different things that I can come up with. And then maybe it will develop into a completely different drawing on another piece of paper, or maybe this actually ends up being my finished piece because it's just, all the drama of life is right on this piece of paper. So what more would you want? Okay, any more questions?
No, they're just eating it up.
Oh, well, I hope so. I hope so. Um, Again, I can't tell you how much fun this is. And I think that if you play with it, just remember there isn't any correct way to do any of this stuff. It all depends on what you want to do and what you want to accomplish. And I'm quite sure that, somebody else would be used the materials and they'll come up with a completely different approach. But this is in my head, believe it or not. Can't help it. There it is. And it just came right out. And it's been such a pleasure doing this for you, and hope that you can enjoy your creative world with these materials as well. So if there are no more questions, I guess that's what I got. Bye-bye, everybody.